Hello everyone, it's Scott, and today we're going to get into March of the Machine, the Aftermath. The spoilers for the set came out yesterday. We got the entire set. It was supposed to be spoiled over a couple days, but they just dropped it all yesterday, basically because the cards have been already out on the internet, so they just released them all to us. So rather than try to go through all 50 cards in one video, what I'm going to do is take them and break them up into logical grouping. So the first one we're going to look at in this video are the Planeswalkers who have been transformed. They've lost their sparks, and now they're just ordinary creatures in the game. So we'll take a look at that in just a moment. But before we do, special thanks to Caffeinated Gamers for sponsoring our video on the March of the Machine Aftermath spoilers. And let's go ahead and look at the Planeswalkers who've lost their spark. So first we have Nissa, Resurgent Animus for 2 and a green mana. You get an Elf Scout who's a 3/3 and has landfall. So whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, add 1 mana of any color. Then if this is the second time this ability has resolved this turn, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal an elf or an elemental card. Put that card into your hand and the rest in the bottom of your library in a random order. So Nissa is similar to Lotus Cobra, and when a land comes into play, you get the benefit of adding a mana of any color to the board. Certainly I think Nissa is potentially better overall than Lotus Cobra, because Lotus Cobra was a 2/1, pretty much anything could kill it. Where Nissa is a little bit stronger, it's not going to fall to cut down or something like that. So I think Nissa has the ability to maybe help ramp a green deck in Standard. Because the ability to get extra lands, I mean, green already does a very good job of gathering more land and getting you extra lands to put into play, multiple a turn. So I think those abilities make Nissa a playable card in Standard. But I think because of the requirement that it has here, that if you're going to, when you resolve it that second time, you have to have elves or elementals. So she's going to have to be in a deck that really is focused on those to really take advantage of her abilities. And one thing I also want to mention with all of these cards, these desparked Planeswalkers, these are the mythics from the set. So we're going to look at all 10 of them here. So our second one is Calyx, Guided by Fate. For 1, a green and a white, you get a legendary enchantment creature that's a human druid. That's a 2/2. And whenever Calyx, Guided by Fate or another enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So this is the same thing that we've seen in the enchantments deck that goes all the way back to the Kamigawa set, with Generous Visitor doing this in that deck. So Calyx kind of serves that same purpose, but it's a second creature that can generate lots and lots of token, or lots and lots of +1 counters. And also it's interesting because of what we got in March of the Machine. This, I think, is an interesting card to go back into that deck with, and then look at the +1/+1 counter synergies that come out of March of the Machine, and maybe we've got an even better enchantments deck going forward because of that. Also, whenever Calyx or another enchanted creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may create a token that's a copy of a non-legendary enchantment you control. Do this once each turn. So that in and of itself is a very, very powerful ability, because none of the enchantments that are in the enchantments deck are legendary. So you do combat damage because you're able to, run through things. You're going to get extra value every turn. So I think Calyx is going to find a way into that deck to see if that deck can be playable again throughout the remainder of March of the Machine Standard season. Next we have Kiora, Sovereign of the Deep. For 3, a green and a blue mana, you get a legendary creature that's a Merfolk Noble. That's a 4/5 with Vigilance and Ward 3. So Kiora is going to be able to protect herself because of the ward. And then she has this ability: whenever you cast a Kraken, Leviathan, Octopus, or Serpent spell from your hand, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is that spell's mana value. You may cast a spell with mana value less than X from among them without paying its mana cost. Put the rest of the cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. So Kiora, I think this is probably more of a commander card, because we don't really have a lot of Krakens and Leviathans and Octopuses and Serpents in Standard to make this really work, but it's possible as we move through the next several sets that we might see more of that. We are going to Ixalan, and there were a lot of different creature types there that might help us as we move forward. So I think really a commander card for now, but has some standard playability. Next we have Nahiri Forged in Fury. For 4 red and a white mana, you get a legendary creature that's Core Artificer. That's a 5/4. It has affinity for equipment. This means that this spell costs 1 less to cast for each equipment you control. And whenever an equipped creature you control attacks, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn, and you may cast equipment spells this way without paying their mana cost. I think this is a really good card for standard right now because we've got actually a pretty significant critical mass of good equipment cards. And we also still have Kamigawa in standard right now, and we have all the equipment creatures that we had from that set in white and in red, and we had some very good creatures in there. So I think there's an equipment deck to build around Nahiri and her abilities, and I can see it very easily being pretty easy to cast Nahiri for just a red and a white mana most of the time. And I think that makes her an interesting card to use and build around. So I think this has some standard playability. Certainly in Commander, in an equipment deck, this might be a very good long-term equipment deck commander for that purpose. Next we have Narset, Enlightened Exile. For 1, a blue, a red, and a white mana, you get a legendary creature. It's a human monk. That's a 3/4. Creatures you control have prowess, which means Narset has prowess as well here because it says creatures. So that's a really nice ability on Narset. And whenever Narset Enlightened Exile attacks, exile target non-creature, non-land card with mana value less than Narset's power from a graveyard and copy it. You may cast a copy without paying its mana cost. So Narset really is going to turn into this very significant value engine as well. So I think this is definitely playable in standard. I think we're going to see a Jeskai Prowess deck built around Narset. We've already kind of got it started with Monastery Monk as kind of the key piece of that deck, but we've got Monastery Swiftspear, and we've got a few other cards that generate a lot of tokens. And Narset's ability here gives prowess to everything, so you get probably around 12 to 16 creatures, and then everything else in the deck is spells that you're going to cast to activate those prowess abilities. So I think overall this is a very good card that I think probably finds its way into a deck in standard that I think can be very competitive, because prowess as an ability, if you've seen mono red as of late, Monastery Swiftspear is really powerful in that deck because you can chain together spells in the late game and do a bunch of damage with Monastery Swiftspear. All right, moving on, we've got our next card, Ob Nixilis Captive Kingpin. For 2, a black and a red mana, you get a legendary creature that's a demon, and a 4/3. Nixilis has flying and trample, and a very important ability. Whenever one or more opponents each lose exactly 1 life, put a +1/+1 counter on Ob Nixilis Captive Kingpin. Exile the top card of your library until your next end step. You may play that card. Right now, we already have a bunch of things in standard that do 1 damage. So I think Nixilis is going to be a very powerful card in standard. It might be the best of the desparked Planeswalkers, because I think you're going to be able to very easily activate the we do 1 damage ability, because you've got cards like Phoenix Chick, you've got cards like Monastery Swiftspear that does 1 damage, you've got cards like Kumana Faces Kakuzan that does 1 damage, and you also have things like And the Festivities, again another card that does 1 damage, and then on top of that you have black abilities that do 1 damage to your opponent and you gain a life, and we got multiple cards with those. So I think the critical mass here is perfect to build around Ob Nixilis, to the point where I think you can get Ob Nixilis to be a very, very large creature that, again, if your opponent can't deal with, he very easily could end a game in just one strike, particularly because Nyxus does have trample. So I think this is so far probably the best card we've seen so far from the Aftermath. Next, we've got Samut, Vizier of Noctamon. For 1, a red and a green mana, you get a legendary creature that's a human warrior cleric. It's 2/3. It has first strike, vigilance, and haste. And whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, if that creature entered the battlefield this turn, draw a card. So I can see some mood in a deck that is a dedicated haste deck. And really, if you look at mono red right now, mono red is really mono red haste with Phoenix Chick, with Monastery Swiftspear, with Bloodthirsty Adversary, with Feldon, with Squee, with the Rampaging Raptor as another possibility. And then obviously you have Thundering Raju. And then you also have a few green cards that have that as well as an ability. So I think activating and getting Samut's ability won't be that much of a problem. So I think there's certainly a build around here. Now, is this a deck that I think, survives post rotation in the fall? I'm not sure, but certainly right now I think there's a deck that can be built around Samut that will probably be pretty good in Standard. Next we have Sarkhan, Soul of Flame. For 1, a blue and a red mana, you get a legendary creature that's a human shaman. That's a 2/4. And importantly, dragon spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So I can see right now we're likely to have an Izzet Dragons deck come with this, or a Grixis Dragons deck more likely, because not only do we have Sarkhan that reduces the cost of dragon spells, but we also have Rivna who does the same thing, and the two of them together I think is very powerful. You get one of them, you're getting 8 opportunities to reduce the cost of your dragons throughout the course of your deck. And I think that makes this a very, very powerful ability. Now, on top of that, whenever a dragon enters the battlefield under your control, you may have Sarkhan, Soul of Flame may become a copy of it until end of turn, except its name is Sarkhan, Soul of Flame, and it's legendary in addition to its other types. So basically, when a dragon enters the battlefield, you have the opportunity to transform Sarkhan into that dragon. So you play, a turn on turn 4, you play a dragon. In essence, you're getting that dragon with haste because Sarkhan becomes that dragon. It will fly over and do damage. So I think because of that, I think that Grixis Dragon deck or we might see just an Izzet Dragon deck, I think is very, very playable as we move forward. Hitasugo and Kaori from March of the Machine is a dragon, and that's why I think we'll move probably towards the Grixis side of it. But in any event, I think that this is finally the point where Dragon Tribal has a really good chance because we have this, and we also have Rivna. All right, so next we have Tyvar, the Bellicose. For 2, a black and a green mana, you get a legendary creature. That's an elf warrior. That's a 5/4. So Tyvar, very powerful creature, 5/4 overstated. And whenever one or more elves you control attacks, they gain Death Touch until end of turn. So Tyvar basically turns your team of elves into a Death Touch team. So anything that blocks them will go ahead and be killed by them, no matter what their power and toughness are. Your elves will kill their creatures, which is a very, very powerful ability, not only in Standard, but in other formats as well. Now, each creature you control has, whenever a mana ability of this creature resolves, put a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the amount of mana this creature produced. This ability triggers only once each turn. So with your mana dorks, and there's a bunch of them, we have several that are elves, that are 2 mana elves. And when that mana ability resolves, you tap it for mana, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, it grows the team, and also allows you to ramp out additional cards. So I think we've got an elf lord already. So I think Tyvar is going to put us in a position where elf tribal in black and green is a viable strategy. All right. And our last legendary creature of the day is Karn, Legacy Reforged. For 5 mana, you get a legendary artifact creature. That's a golem. Karn Legacy Reforged power and toughness are equal to the greatest mana value among artifacts you control. So Karn, first of all, is a 5/5. If you have no other artifacts in the game, Karn is simply a 5/5. And at the beginning of your upkeep, add colorless mana for each artifact you control. This mana cannot be spent to cast non-artifact spells. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. So I can see this, Karn being a very powerful card in Standard, because basically what you would be able to do with Karn is you cast a Reckoner Bankbuster on turn 2, on turn 5 you cast Karn, and then on turn 6 during your upkeep you get 2 mana because you've got a Bankbuster and you've got Karn in play. So it's a free activation then of Reckoner Bankbuster. And we have other legendary artifacts or artifacts that will help push that ability. And we haven't seen an artifact tribal deck because there's really no Lord for them outside of Urza. But I think there might be one that forms because you've got good creatures like this that generates a good bit of value for you, and the ability to activate abilities of things is really powerful. And because of that, I think Karn has a potential to see some play in Standard. All right, so those are our legendary creatures from March of the Machine, the Aftermath. These planeswalkers who've lost their spark. So in the rest of our video series, we're going to look at the instants and sorceries in one video. We're going to look at the enchantments. We're going to look at the legendary creatures that are not former planeswalkers, and then we'll also look at the general creatures that are in the set. So we'll be looking at about 10 cards in each of our videos. All right, so thanks for watching this video on the March of the Machine Aftermath, our Despark Planeswalker version of the previews, and we'll be back with some additional videos over the next day or two, kind of talking through where the cards are for Standard. Thanks, I'll see you next time.